In this lesson, we're going to look at how we can convert among fractions, decimals, and percents. So if we're looking at 2/5, that is a fraction. Can we express that as a decimal? Well, to do that, we recognize that means 2 divided by 5, or 5 into 2. 2, of course, means 2 point. How many zeros do we need? I think 1 is all we need here. Decimal point goes up. 5 into 24 times. 4 times 5 is 20. There is no remainder. And the answer is just 0.4. So 2/5 is 0.4. If we have a decimal, we want to convert that to a fraction. Let's say, for example, we have 0.62. Well, that means 6/10, 2/100, or if you like, 62 over 100. But once we're here, we need to go ahead and reduce the fraction. 62 means 2 times 31. 100 is 10 times 10, or if you like, 2 times 5 times 2 times 5. But we can see we can cancel out a 2 on the top and the bottom. So if the 2 goes away, we have 31 upstairs, and downstairs we have 5 times 2 is 10, times 5 is 50. So indeed, 0.62 is 31 over 50. So converting from decimals to fractions, fractions to decimals, not terribly difficult. But the question is, how do we convert something into a percent? So if I have 2/5, if I want to convert it into a percent, how do I do that? Before we can answer that question, we need to ask ourselves, what does percent mean? So if I say 10%, what does that mean? That actually means 10 parts out of 100. So a percent just means divided by 100. So 10% means 10 divided by 100. So this could reduce. 10 divided by 100 would just be 1/10. I hope that's obvious for us to see. If we had 35%, what does 35% mean? That means 35 divided by 100. So we have indeed converted the percent into a fraction, just not a reduced fraction. So if I'm to reduce that, 35 is 5 times 7. 100 is 2525, 2 times 5, times 2 times 5. So thinking about getting rid of the 5s, and 1 times 7 is left upstairs. 5 times 2 is 10, times 2 is 20, and that gives us 7/20. So going from a decimal to a fraction is relatively easy, and going from a decimal to a percent is even easier, because if I have something like 675%, that just means 675 divided by 100, which is as simple as moving the decimal point 2 places to the left. So that would just give us 6.75. Or if you had 2%, that means move the decimal point 2 places to the left, 2% 0.02. So from a percent to a fraction is relatively easy. From a percent to a decimal is very easy. So the only challenging exercise in this set is to look at what happens when we want to convert a fraction, like 2/5 into a percent. So we saw that earlier. We saw 2/5, and we want to think about what does that mean as a percent. So the question is, 2/5 is what percent? Which if we write it this way, we could say 2 out of 5 is how much x out of 100. And this is a proportion. And the one way we can solve a proportion is we can think about how much do you multiply to go from 5 to 100. We multiplied by 20. So to go from 2, we'd also multiply by 20. So 5 times 20 is 100. 2 times 20 would be 40. So it would give us 40 over 100. Which is 40%. But if you're using a calculator, there's an even easier way to do this. So if we're looking at something like 3/8, and our question is 3/8 is what percent? So to answer that question, we're going to say 3/8 is how much x out of 100. And using algebra, you could see that we could multiply both sides by 800. Multiply this side by 8 times 100, multiply this side by 8. times 100. And you wind up getting the equivalent of cross multiplication, namely 3 times 100 is 300 is 8x, and then we divide by 8. And we get 300 divided by 8 is x. And again, we can do that if you'd like. 8 into 300. 8 into 33 times. 3 times 8 is 24. 8 into 67 times. 7 times 8 is 56. Decimal point. 8 into 45 times 5 times 8 is 40. So what we get is we get x is 37.5. So what that means is it means 3/8 is 37.5 out of 100, which is 37.5 divided by 100 is the same thing as saying 37.5%. Okay, continuing with this, if we want to rewrite 5/6 is what percent? So to answer that question, we're going to take 5 over 6 is something over 100. Now let me go ahead and give you a shortcut. Whenever you're solving a proportion, you multiply across where you can and then divide. So to answer this question, all you have to do is to take 5 times 100 divided by 6. So 500 over 6, which you can use a calculator if you want, but I'll show you the longhand discussion here. So 6 into 500, 6 into 50, 6 into 58 times. 8 times 6 is 48. 6 into 23 times. 3 times 6 is 18. So we get 83 and 2/6, or 83 and 1/3. So 5/6 is actually 83 1/3 over 100, 83 and 1/3%. Or if you'd want, you could say it is 83.3333 repeating percent. Please recognize that numbers could be more than 100%. For example, if I had 7 over 2 is what percent? We're going to again say 7 over 2 is what over 100? And using the rule I just showed you, multiply across where you can. 7 times 100 divided by 2. So 700 divided by 2 is 350. So we get 7 over 2 is 350 over 100, or 350 divided by 100. Divided by 100 is equivalent to saying percent. 350 divided by 100 is 350%.